Audio. Okay. We should be good. Audio is working.
All right. Welcome, everyone. We are so glad that you are joining us. And I am very excited to introduce our guest today. He's not a guest to us, he is part of our team here. He is a faithful friend, and he's part of our HCBC counseling team. And we're so thankful for that. So thank you for being with us today, Brian. Brian is our assistant director. He is also a LPC, an LMFT. He owns his own private practice, Deep Waters Counseling. Before entering counseling, you had a significant career in IT for over 30 years, right?
Just 17.
17.
Almost 20, yeah.
Okay, well,
I'm not that old.
I made stuff up.
I started when I was 4.
17, 30, a long time,
Yeah.
a long time.
Yeah.
And he brings those gifts and talents to us. He organizes all the tech stuff for the brown bag. So he's been a busy man preparing and doing the tech stuff. I'm absolutely no help to him. I can hold a microphone. That's it. Brian's trained in so many different modalities: EMDR, brain spotting, RT, PACT, just to name a few. He's also a certified, I want to make sure I get it right because it's hard to say, pain processing therapist. I don't know why that's so hard to say. Say that 3 times fast.
PRT.
PRT, yes. Oh yeah, I should have done the acronym. But beyond all his credentials, most importantly, Brian is just an amazing human being. He brings wisdom, kindness, humility, thoughtfulness into every interaction that he engages with. And we're just so grateful he's on our team. And to top it all off, you're an amazing cook. Yes. And he does, it's kind of annoying because you have so many gifts and you also cook well. But he brings that gift to his family and really does a beautiful job of creating connection with your family through cooking. And you share treats with us on occasion. So that's pretty cool too. Today, Brian is going to be sharing with us from one of his specialties, pain and mental health. And so, Brian, we're thankful to get to learn from you and work with you every day. So I'm going to hand you the floor.
Thank you, Stacy. I was tempted to say, okay, stop, because I have to talk, so cut it out.
Sorry.
No, it's okay. So yeah, thanks for joining us. I put in the chat that, again, we're having some technical difficulties. So the plan was that you would be able to submit chat questions, but you can't. Sorry. So the only thing you're going to be able to do is send me emails, and I will get back to you later after this, because clearly I can't do emails while I'm talking. But I will get on those, and I will get back to you, this afternoon and tomorrow, and for the next several days. Also, later in the presentation, you'll see a QR code, and I'll go ahead and put the slide up so you can see what the slides look like. But the slides are available as handouts. So if you go to this QR code, this URL, you can get the handouts. Everybody in the room already has a copy of them on your desk. And then thanks for being here, and I appreciate you all joining in, and I really hope that this is fruitful and helpful. So we're going to talk about chronic pain and mental health. And really, I'm going to introduce pain reprocessing therapy, because I am a certified in that. So certainly, if that's interesting to you, I want you to be able to pursue that. I'll tell you how to do that. But also, just because it was interesting to me to learn that my clients experienced chronic pain. It was kind of a surprise to me, and just want to put that on your radar so that you're aware of how chronic pain enters the room. You don't have to be a pain therapist, chronic pain therapist, in order to be able to recognize that chronic pain is part of the story. And just to kind of give you some ideas on what to do with that or how to incorporate that into your work. Okay. So first, I want to talk for a second about memory consolidation, because memory consolidation has very little to do with pain reprocessing therapy, but it's a thing, and it's part of my work. It's part of the DNA of the work that I do. And so I want to touch on that so that as I'm referring to it later, if you haven't heard about memory consolidation, at least you'll have some clue as to what I'm talking about. So memory consolidation is a discovery of neuroscience back in the 90s-ish, that then was brought to the therapy field by Bruce Eckert. And his website is the one that's down at the bottom of the slide, coherencetherapy.org. Highly recommend it, although it can be a difficult read. It's just great information. So memory consolidation is the way that our brain changes memory. And that's important because we have these memories that get stuck in space, they get stuck in that place, and then we feel like we can't progress through it. Our clients certainly feel like they can't progress through it. And so this is something that's important for us to know. This is how we learn, and this is how we relearn. And so the steps of memory consolidation is to kind of reactivate. There's an emotional activity that sort of occurs in that space. We want that activity to sort of be there, not too much, but a little bit. Then we want to create what's called a mismatch experience. And then we want to kind of flip back and forth between those things, back and forth. And if you don't know what I'm talking about, there's a little bit more detail, so hang on. The way we know that we've done it correctly is that we can sort of verify the experience, because clients will, and we will, we find that we are less emotionally reactive to the memory than what we were beforehand. We also find that the symptoms, the things that sort of come out of the coping mechanisms that come out of those memories tend to either decline or go away. And then what Bruce Eckert talks about is effortless permanence. And I love that. And also I struggle with that because nothing's effortless, right? But in the memory consolidation pattern and the way that it's been observed in neuroscience anyway, is that it dramatically shifts, it dramatically changes not just our behavior, but it dramatically changes what creates those behaviors. And so, for example, we could talk about like different, and in fact, if whatever your therapy is of choice, if you do some research on your therapy and memory consolidation, you'll probably find at least one paper that talks about how memory consolidation is a part of the work that you do already. And so that it's just this underlying thing that appears. Memory consolidation is a part of the work, and so of course it's a part of the work of pain reprocessing therapy. So we're gonna talk about that. We're gonna build on that, but let me just give the big picture again. Memory consolidation is basically where we invite our clients to wrestle with what feels true, like is automatically just sort of comes up as feels true in the moment, versus what they can kind of wrestle with and recognize is actually true, or what they really believe to be true, as opposed to what feels true in their body. That difference is what we're dealing with when we talk about memory consolidation. And I think you can see how that fits into possibly the way that our, the somatic experience and the way that our body responds, and certainly the way that we feel pain and chronic pain. Okay, so this is the point where I'd say, do you have any questions? But you can't answer that, so I'm not going to ask. So then let's talk about chronic pain. So clients come in and they've got all kinds of things going on. And of course they come in because they're anxious, or because they're having a conflict in their marriage, or because they're, there's some sort of a experience or something that they're coming in to your office for. But then on that sheet that they fill out when they come in, you may also have some of these things listed. And this is slide number 1, by the way, of a couple of different slides. And then even that, the list is not complete. There are lots of different things that can show up in and around chronic pain. Chronic pain, basically, we're talking about pain that just lasts and lasts and lasts and won't go away. And there's lots of different ways that shows up. Again, I mean, irritable bowel syndrome, and joint and muscle pain. And then, of course, here's another list. And so a lot of these diagnoses, people come in with a diagnosis like, the doctor says I have this. And that doesn't mean that part of their experience is not what we would work on or work with in pain reprocessing therapy. So pain reprocessing therapy is a process of allowing us to sort of differentiate between what's actually happening in my body and what my brain thinks is happening in my body. And that's an important distinction, because when we talk about what is happening versus what our brain thinks is happening, what we're talking about, chronic pain, in the way that pain reprocessing therapy views it, is learned pain. That our body learns to interpret signals as pain. And it's not that they're not painful. It's just that our body learns that those signals are pain signals. So there's other terms for chronic pain. Neuroplastic pain. I like that one because it plays on that idea, and it goes into that sense of neuroplasticity, that our brain is plastic and can be changed and molded. And so part of the idea here then is you're thinking, man, if it can mold into pain, then can we mold it out of pain, or can we learn out of pain? Yes, we'll talk about that. Neuropathic pain. Nociceptive hypersensitivity, which is basically that the nerves in your body that pick up pain are hypersensitive, like they turn the volume up and they are hypersensitive. And then sometimes you'll hear the term conversion disorder or functional neurological disorder. Those are basically the idea that you have a pain, and in conversion disorder, a lot of what you experience is you have a pain like in your back, and then all of a sudden you have a pain in your shoulder, and then you have a pain in your foot, and then it's like it's moving, and so they call that conversion disorder. But it's all under this umbrella of chronic pain, which is real. It really is. It is real. Essentially, learned pain, chronic pain, is a state of increased sensitivity. That's what that means, is that the volume has been turned up, that as the nerves are transmitting information, the nervous system and the brain is interpreting it as pain, which then we think pain means damage, that there's something wrong. So, learned pain, chronic pain, neuroplastic pain, it's a physiological response. And so it's built into the body, it's part of the system, and it can actually be really helpful short term, because if you hurt yourself, you need to protect that thing. But when that thing has healed, you no longer should have to protect that thing. And the chronic pain is the part where we keep protecting it even though there's nothing actually wrong. And so this is part of what this is part of where chronic pain, I think, is really, really interesting to us. And if you have chronic pain, if you sorry, I keep touching the microphone. If you experience chronic pain, some of this information is really challenging to wrestle with. So just say that up front. Most chronic pain is not rooted in structural damage. That doesn't mean it didn't start as a structural damage. I mean, if you broke a limb or damaged your body in an accident, that starts as potentially a structural damage. But it doesn't, when it says it's not rooted in structural damage, it means that what you're experiencing in the present is no longer caused by structural damage, because the structural damage is gone. And the way you know that is because you're going to the doctor, and the doctor's looking at you and going, I don't know, there's nothing wrong with you. Here's some pain pills. Or here's something else to do, or here's somebody else to go see. So interestingly enough, and there's a slide on the next slide, you'll see some more breakdown of this, but 64% of adults with no pain. So there's no chronic pain condition, but in the study and in the examination, one study said that 64% of these adults that don't really report pain, they have bulges, disc bulges, protrusions, herniations, and disc degeneration, and yet they have no back pain. Disc changes in the back are a normal sign of aging, but they're not causative of pain. And again, that's related to the idea that there are people who have the exact same, the scans, the examination of the back shows the exact same effects, but some people experience pain, some people don't experience pain. This reminds me of two people get into two different car accidents that are very similar. The next day, one of them is driving and the other one won't get back in a car. This reminds me of that. It's like there's something that overlaps, that there's more going on here than just the physical. 60–80% of patients that have herniated discs, those are naturally resorbed within 1 year. And so again, just interesting information to think about how we treat what we typically, back pain is a big deal, right? Back pain is a big deal. And how we typically treat it. And then most medical chronic pain treatments target the brain, not the body, not the injured part. So even when we talk about some surgeries, that surgery is almost a placebo. I know that's a complicated thing to say, but it's almost a placebo effect, where the impact is actually going on in the brain, not in the body itself. It's not necessarily going to relieve what you're experiencing in the body necessarily. And so all of this is important. I keep saying these sort of words, and we'll come to this in a second. So here's another slide that kind of breaks down common degenerative spine findings, but in patients who had they have no pain, they have no symptoms related to those things. And of course, you can see that, I mean, as our bodies get older, they have more of those findings, but not necessarily the pain. 96% of people at 80 years old have disc degeneration but don't have pain. That's amazing, right? Because you would think disc degeneration equals pain, and that's not the case. So learned pain is real pain. It is real. It is really, really there. But here's the other piece that is important for us to wrestle with. Pain is also in our heads. That the way that we know that we are in pain is not because we are in pain. The way we know that we are in pain is because our body, our brain, our nervous system recognizes that signal that the nerves are transmitting is a signal of pain. And you know what? Most of the time that works great. Most of the time it's true. Most of the time it's accurate. Most of the time it's telling us exactly what we need to know to keep ourselves safe. So neuroplastic pain, which is that learned pain, results from the sensitized signals. Again, that volume is turned up really high. Okay. Where are you? Uh-oh. There it is. Okay. So I got this video. I'm going to show this video. If you've seen it before, it's fine. This guy is a comedian and magician. He's not a therapist. He's not a doctor. And he gives really goofy names for things. It is not true. It's not the Seinfeldian effect. He's silly. But what he's showing is real. And it's again, just recognizing that pain is real, but also there's something that's going on in our brains and nervous systems. Okay.
I placed an ad online inviting participants to take part in an experiment. I'm going to make these people believe that this fake rubber prop is actually their real arm.
Seems unlikely.
The hammer test.
Oh! Oh!
You're good.
Oh!
Don't worry.
Wow!
Look at your fingers. Your hand's okay, right?
Yeah. Okay. So okay. You've heard of phantom limb. And so similar kind of concept is that our brain and our nervous system can associate pain with a limb that is no longer there or a limb that actually isn't there. It's a rubber arm. And actually, Stacy, I thought about ordering a rubber arm and like a couple of years ago and using it, but I've just never actually gone that direction. But yeah, but so fear drives pain. Fear creates and motivates and initiates and pushes pain. And so that volume is turned up because in our body, the amygdala, our nervous system is tuned to that pain that we had. And so it's watching for that to happen again because that's how we learn, right? Let's not do that again. So then that creates this fear. And so a big part of the work in pain reprocessing, what did you do to me? Pain reprocessing therapy is fear reduction. It's to be able to reduce fear. And part of that is that information we were talking about a few minutes ago of like being able to understand the bigger picture of what pain is, where it comes from, how it works. Here's the data around what we know about pain and people's experience of pain. And so the assumption that we live with is that if I'm feeling pain, there must be something wrong with my body. And so when the brain believes that the body is damaged, it interprets the signal then as pain. Rightly so, right? Because we need to do something about it. So when we talk about fear, fear is a pretty big term that can include frustration, despair, depression, anxiety, stress. And there's all kind anguish, all kinds of emotions that come up that can fit under this umbrella term of what I'm saying is fear. Is like, I just have really strong emotions that I can't get in front of and I can't get away from in terms of what I'm feeling. Okay, so now let's go more specifically into pain reprocessing therapy. Pain reprocessing therapy talks about a cycle. The cycle is that your brain interprets that there's a danger signal. The nerves are sending a signal that is danger. Oftentimes that first time it's right, it's correct, it's true. And then that creates a spike in anxiety. I mean, because our body's responding to what's happening. And so that spike in anxiety, that spike in energy, then creates uncomfortable physical sensation, whether we experience that as pain or whether we also experience other forms of discomfort that cause us to move, to do something different. Then that creates a familiar behavior pattern, which in PRT, they say a negative behavioral pattern. That we develop a behavioral pattern of, this is how I deal with, when I have this signal, this is what I do. When I have this signal, this is what I do. And so I'm just doing this over and over and over again. And it's creating a cycle that then reinforces that my body's in danger, that my body's experiencing pain, which then reinforces the message to the brain and the nervous system. So then we have a neat little circle. Pain reprocessing therapy was developed back in the, like, I want to say late 90s, early 2000s, but the key research study that came out from Colorado was in 2017. Really great study, and they studied folks with chronic back pain. I'm going to show you some data from that one that I think is just amazing and interesting. But really, what struck them is that they found these significant results in terms of people's relief from pain. Not just like there is a reduction in pain, but even like total resolution of pain for many of their patients. And that a year later, that was still the case, which is interesting. And you think, oh, well, how does that compare with placebo? And how does that compare with how we normally? Let's find out. Let's look at the data. But also, I want to put out on this slide, there's a link for the course, the pain reprocessing course. If this is interesting to you, you want to find out more, I would go to their website and pursue that. They also have a 1-hour introduction free CEU kind of thing, which is very different from what I'm doing right now. So I would encourage you to pursue that and look at that if you're interested in helping your clients with chronic pain. Okay, so data. So one of the things that they showed was the pain intensity. And so if you notice the I don't know, this darker bluish, grayish color, whatever that is, that's like normally how we deal with back pain. These are the normal procedures that we would do for back pain. And then the placebo, of course, is the orange. And so that's where we tell you we're doing something or we're not. And then the results with people who went through PRT, that's the blue line. And so we're talking about pain intensity. And so for those of you who are familiar with EMDR or familiar with something similar to that, where we talk about SUDS, subjective units of distress, subjective units of pain, right? On a scale of 0 to 5, tell me about your pain. And people were reporting initially, they were saying it's like a 4. And with PRT, now they're reporting it's a 1. That's pretty amazing. And then 12 months later, they're still reporting about a 1.5, which again, pretty amazing, right? Next slide. This one is, it blows my mind. Okay, percentage and change of pain intensity from the baseline to post-treatment. So beforehand, where were you, and then where are you afterwards, and looking at the difference. And so what's interesting is if you look at the usual care, which is kind of this dark gray one, you'll see that there's a whole bunch of dots lined up on 0. What that means is no difference. I went through these things, I did these things, I did the usual care things, and for that group of people, nothing changed. What's interesting too is that there's another line, if I can find where my cursor is, there's another little line of dots right here, which is, you know, what, 27, 30, maybe -30, right? So it's like there's an improvement, because the further down it goes, the more improved it is. There's an improvement, but it's not huge, it's not significant. So then that black line represents kind of the median. That's the middle space. So with usual, you see we go from wherever we were, we improve a little bit, maybe 10, 15, 20%, maybe. Interesting. Placebo, orange. We're not actually doing anything, we're just telling you that we're doing something, better results. That's wild. And then we look at PRT, and this is what's interesting to me about this is that when they were doing this research, they had no idea. They did not expect that they would get this. All of these items down here listed at no pain whatsoever. Now, granted, there's a lot of people who are still experiencing pain. Some of them, one of them at least, is still at 0. So there's a segment that's still, nothing's changed. But for everybody else, they went down. Everybody went down below. Nobody was up above. That's awesome. That's great. That's good to know. I like it when my clients leave better than they came. But then to go all the way to 100% improvement. That's crazy. That is wild. You don't see that. And so they're yeah, that's amazing. That's a very impressive piece of information. And again, this is about back pain. There's been other studies that have been replicated for other forms of pain that show similar results with pain reprocessing therapy. They started with back pain because back pain is so common, it's so frequently reported, and there's such a wide range of experience that they started with back pain because it's an easy one to find. And then among patients reporting a pain-free or nearly pain-free state, right afterwards and then a year following. And again, you see that but even the placebo and in the regular, it's like a year later, they feel better. So part of that buys into this idea that the pain that we experience over time, for at least some of us, might get better. It's kind of on its own, or with time gets better. But it's interesting looking at the number for the pain reprocessing therapy, and that it declined, it went down, and yet it's still dramatically higher than the usual treatment and even placebo. And again, this is a part where I would say, do you have any questions? But you can't answer that. So let's talk about how do we know what's going on with our clients when they come in and they're talking about this other thing, but then also you're noticing or recognizing that they're rubbing their shoulders, or they mentioned that I've got this knee thing, and I've had it since I was in high school or whatever. So don't immediately assume that what they're describing is non-structural or non-medical. So what I mean by that is you don't want to take on responsibility that isn't yours. You don't want to take on a role that isn't yours. You're not a medical doctor. I mean, unless you are a medical doctor, in which case go for it. But if you're not a medical doctor, if you're a therapist, that's not your thing. So you want to make sure that you communicate with your clients. You don't necessarily have to communicate with their doctor, but you do need to communicate with your clients. Make sure that they are seeing doctors, understand that medical history, and understand what they've done. And we're going to get to a case study here in a minute where we're going to walk through an example and a sample, and we'll kind of talk through some of that. But don't immediately assume that it's learned pain. There could be some structural things in place, and you do not want to tell your clients you're not doing any damage, go do that, and then they actually are, right? You want to make sure that the doctors have seen it and can in fact verify that. Also, just to be aware, chronic pain has a type. People that are type A, people that are really busy, people that are competitive, people that are overachievers, people that are extremely conscientious or perfectionists. Don't look at me like that. People who have a heightened sense of anxiety, people who have childhood adversity. Which I mean, gosh, who isn't? But anyway, you got all these things, which then it makes sense. When I learned about chronic pain, I'm sitting in this conference and this guy's talking about chronic pain and what they do in their clinic with chronic pain. I was blown away because I was thinking through my list of clients and I was like, yep. They all have these things and they all have chronic pain, and we never talked about it. So then there is in the PRT training, there's a checklist that you kind of develop or come up with that allows you to go through and see, like, what's the likelihood that what we're experiencing, what we're dealing with is chronic pain. So based on top of the idea that this type characteristic of person is who's in your office, and that they've been to doctor after doctor after doctor after doctor, and they've had just a series of unfulfilling diagnoses, right, and offers, then some of the things that we could talk about is like, where did your symptoms develop? If the symptoms develop without injury, then you're probably talking about chronic pain. What does that mean? That means, well, when I was in my 30s, I had this job that I hated, and so I developed back pain. Well, that makes no sense. What did you do in your job that you would develop back pain? I mean, unless you're like lifting heavy boxes or something, if you're just going to work, why would you develop? Because that's not a damaged structural induced back pain. That's something else. That's stress. That's anxiety. That's that whole type class that we talked about. Does that make sense? If it did develop with injury, so for example, I worked for a company that shipped packages, and so I'm in the warehouse and I'm doing this and I'm twisting like this, and all of a sudden I got this pinch in my back, and then ever since I've had this pain. Okay, well, that makes sense that there maybe was an injury. But here's the thing: how long has it been since you've been doing that job? 25 years. Your back still hurts. That's weird. And the doctors say there's no, I don't see anything. There's no, I mean, there's a bulge or there's a, but otherwise I don't see any reason. Then you're thinking, okay, maybe we're talking about chronic pain. Symptoms begin during a time of stress. That's an indicator that this is probably a chronic pain. And we're not talking about an isolated, like you check off one thing and you're like, yep, this is chronic pain. We're talking like if you get on this list and you're like, yes, 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 it increases the likelihood that what we're talking about is learned pain, neuroplastic pain. Symptoms are inconsistent or vary. You know, when I'm home, I feel great. But when I go to my mother-in-law's house, I like tie up into knots. Oh, that's interesting. Yeah, like we were talking a minute ago, it hurts in my back, and then it hurts in my foot, and then it hurts in my neck, and then it hurts. Like every time you see your client, they have a different pain, or it's making a rounds in their body. We're probably talking about some neuroplastic pain. Symptoms are multiple. Symptoms are symmetrical. This is interesting. So let's say that you have a client who has a pain in one foot, and yet they actually have pain in both feet in the same spot. That's unusual. That's unusual. If it's structural, right? If it's structural, if you drop something on your foot, one foot's going to hurt. The other foot's not going to hurt. But if the other foot hurts, what's up with that? That is an indication that there's a learned pain. Oh, fascinating study. If you take okay, here's a commercial. If you take the PRT training, you'll learn about this guy who got a nail in his foot. Amazing, fascinating story. That's all I'm gonna say. Unexplained by known structural conditions, and this is highlighted and bolded here because it is that thing of like, yeah, I've been to this doctor, I've been to this doctor, I've been to this type of doctor, I went to the, I went to that one, and I went to and like all of these things for years, and nobody can really tell me what's going on. Triggered by factors that had nothing to do with the body. Again, like when I'm in my mother-in-law's house, that's when it shows up. A family history of chronic pain. We grow up in chronic pain space. We tend to recognize, and that becomes part of our normal story. And then, of course, co-occurring mental health conditions are common: depression, anxiety, post-traumatic stress, OCD, and eating disorders. So one of those things doesn't tell you that this is chronic pain, but you can see how there's this picture that begins to develop as we look at the entire list. Okay, so stages of PRT. We start with education, the things that we were talking about a little bit ago, like what is pain? Where does it come from? How do we experience it? What is our body telling us? So understanding the neuroscience behind the pain is really important for clients to be able to make sense of what's happening. One of the first questions that you get asked when you have these conversations is, so you're telling me my pain is in my brain, which sounds like a bad thing. And the answer is yes, but not in the way you're thinking, not in the way you mean it. I'm not saying you're making it up. What I am saying is that your brain is interpreting signals, and it's possible that your brain is at least partially misinterpreting the signals. And then we talk about how the brain, how the pain is processed in the brain, and how that pain can become sort of a learned response. And one of the classic examples is when you wake up in the morning and you know what, I'm not in pain, but as soon as I start moving, I'm going to be in pain, so I'm not going to move. I'm just going to lay here. That is part of that learned response that we're not necessarily conscious of. I mean, the way I say it, it sounds like somebody's thinking about it, but we're not necessarily like I hold my arm a certain way or whatever, right? It's like that. We don't mean to do that, but we're doing something in response, and it's creating a pathway. And then the next thing is tracking. So tracking is it is mindfulness. It is tracking the experience of what's in the body. And so we have there's a case study that we'll talk about here in a minute that I'll illustrate some of this. But the idea is then again by doing this, and by it's acceptance, commitment, right? By recognizing what's happening, by paying attention to what's happening, by that non-judgmental approach, it creates the space where that fear and anxiety decreases, and as it does, the volume goes down and the pain decreases. Which, I mean, sounds like a dream. That's crazy. It doesn't happen, and yet I showed you the stats that shows that it does. Cognitions. So then we're talking about the things that we believe. So in EMDR, we talk about the negative cognitions. Some of the other theories have picked up on this idea of negative beliefs, negative cognitions. Narrative therapy is based entirely upon this idea of like, what am I thinking about myself? What's the stories that I've made up about myself in response or in reaction to what's happening? So part of PRT is recognizing what those negative thought patterns are and being able to process and work through those. And then there's the ability to process the emotion, like what I'm feeling in my body, what I'm feeling about the pain, what I'm feeling about my experiences, what I'm feeling about myself. All of these pieces come together into that emotional processing, because chronic pain is often linked to unresolved emotional issues. So often there's family of origin stuff that shows up in that space. Not always, but often. And then, of course, at each of these stages, we go back to this memory consolidation. Each of these stages supports and utilizes memory consolidation. There's this idea of here's what you believe, or here's what has sort of been this inherent fear or this inherent thought or this inherent experience, and then here's something else that's counter to that. Imagine, so one of the examples that they show in the training, there's actually a video where they show one of the guys is working with this woman who's got pain in her neck. And so he's asking her, as they're sitting there talking, and he asks her to turn her head like this, and they're in a room with a bunch of people watching. And he says, everybody turn your head. And so everybody turns their head. And then he's like, what did you notice? And she's like, well, I hear all this sound in my neck. And he looks, and he's looking around at the room, and he's like, who else hears something? And all these arms are going up of like, yeah, I hear stuff in my neck, like popping and creaking and whatever. That's not pain. And she's like, what? That's like, that doesn't mean that I'm. And so it's just being able to process this and have this conflict of this juxtaposition experience is part of each of these stages. Okay, so let's pause, do your survey, grab your phone, take the screenshot, or write down the little QR code if you need, or the URL, so that you can do the survey in a little bit. It'll come up again in a minute, so if you miss it, it's okay, watch and it'll come up at the end, but give a pause here for you to be able to do that. And then just let you know, again, I would say, do you have questions? But what I'm going to say instead is we're going to talk about the case study, a character that I totally made up, doesn't exist, not a real person. His name is Joe. Again, doesn't really exist. But it representative of some of the work that I've done and people that I've worked with. And so you'll get a chance to kind of see how some of this works. And again, if you have questions, please do email me, and I would be delighted to engage in some conversation with you around some of these things later. Okay, so meet Joe. Joe's in his late 60s. He's a retired professional. He's got a foot neuropathy, and he's had it for 20 years. Plus, he's got back pain and neck pain and pelvis pain that sort of circulates, right? It's not all there all the time. But at any given week when he comes in to see me, he's got one of those things is flared up. But it all stems from, and it all began with the foot neuropathy. Foot neuropathy, in case you don't know, foot neuropathy is like a pain or tingling in the feet. And it's common, especially common in people who are in their 50s and up, 60s and up. And really, really difficult to diagnose and really, really difficult to do something about. And so very common for people to experience it and just try to live with it. And it can get really, really painful. And for other people, it doesn't get painful. For other people, it's just kind of annoying. And so then when they hear people complain about the pain, the people who are annoyed go, oh, just get over it, just deal with it. But it's like, no, your experiences are different, right? And so you really have to be able to even know that, right? When Joe hears that, your brother's experience of neuropathy is not your experience of neuropathy. Oh, okay, that makes some sense, because my brother doesn't experience it the way I do. He doesn't struggle with it the way that I do. He's been to specialists. He's got no clear diagnosis. He's been all over the place trying to find what can I do to fix this and what can I do about it. And in fact, he's been told by several that he doesn't actually have neuropathy, but he has the experience and he has the feeling of it. But he's been told by those who know that in fact you don't have nerve damage, you don't have neuropathy. Okay, well, he also notices, and we talk about that, his pain gets worse when he is stressed. And when he's distracted, when he's doing things that he enjoys doing, then it kind of tends to fade or go away. May not go away completely, but it goes away. It lessens. So we spent time talking about how the brain interprets pain as a threat, and that made sense to him as we sort of tried to understand, and we talked about the when it began, what happened, and he's thinking about being forced out of his job and not having a job anymore, and then being at home, and then not knowing how to interact with his wife because that was different, and so it was a stressful time and a stressful season. And then he finally, as we were talking about these things, he finally started to understand what some of the doctors meant when they said that you're not, like, if you go out and walk, you're not actually causing any damage. And so now he's finally beginning to understand what that means, because up until this moment, he just didn't quite get it. And so the phrase that's often used is motion is lotion, right? If you're moving it, your body produces a mechanism and a means in which it sort of lubricates itself and makes it go. So if you're old enough to know this, when you sit still long enough and you get up, you can't help but go, because motion is lotion. Okay. Tracking. So did some tracking and some mindfulness exercises with Joe. One of the things that is interesting is the idea of, sort of based on parts work. A similar kind of concept is to have people interact with their pain or their body part that is in pain. So having Joe interact with his feet and talk to his feet and ask his feet, are you mad at me? And his feet say, no. And so then Joe says, no, my feet say they're not mad. And I said, really? Your feet aren't mad that you have done some of these things that you talked about doing, that then really your feet got aggravated after you did those things? And so he asked a little bit more, and then his feet are like, well, yeah, actually I am mad at you because you're not doing it right. You're not very critical kind of voice that comes out. Just interesting to be able to address and learn from our bodies in a different way. So I think of that type of experience kind of like sand tray. We're creating a metaphor, we're using a metaphor, and we're building something that allows the client to interact with their body in a different way, to observe their body in a different way. And so he's getting curious, and as that curiosity is increasing, fear is decreasing. And so as fear decreases, then so does the pain. And then in the cognition space, Joe finally realized that he feels old. He got pushed out of his work. He's been retired, like useless. Like, what am I doing? I feel old and frail and fragile and useless. But then as we're talking again, wrestling with something, he's recognizing that he's more active and healthy and capable than he feels. But certainly, I think part of that is related to his family of origin's chronic pain and watching his dad decline. And so he's like, at this age, I am doing a lot more than my dad did at this age. I'm not repeating the process or the pattern that I saw there. And so just wrestling with that and being able to recognize that space. And then, of course, we talked about childhood diversity. And then, of course, he's got this tendency to be a people pleaser. And that tends to step into this space of feeling the stress that isn't mine and putting that stress on my body. And then my body's having a response to that. So those are the stages of PRT. And again, over time with consistency, and as Joe learns how to communicate and think and be aware of his body differently, he tends to recognize what that pain represents and what that means, and then the symptoms are reduced. It doesn't feel as painful. In his case, again, make believe, but several of my clients, I would say half of my clients, they still have pain. It's not gone. But then there's another segment of my clients that probably 30 to 40% solid are pain-free, which is pretty great when you consider some of the pains that they've they've experienced. If you have questions, there's the link for the free introductory course. And if you have questions, send me an email. There's my email on the screen. Send me emails with what questions you might have, and I will follow back up with you. What's that?
I was just reading lots of fancy.
Oh yeah. Yeah. I mean, in this room, there's some people here. So those of you that are online, you can listen as we have a conversation, right? So, but if you have a question or a thought or a flight of fancy that you would like to share with me and the rest of the internet, feel free. Yes.
I want to return to the slide that chronic pain has a type.
Chronic pain has a type, yeah.
You talked about the type A and busy. Just curious how you would play out a little bit of playing with the pain of the different types, just to kind of increase our awareness of those.
Yeah. So, again, I mean, I think one of the things that's common when you look at this list is when you think in terms of boundaries, is that we have a tendency when we fall into these categories, we have a tendency to take on responsibilities that aren't ours. And taking on those responsibilities or feeling responsible for things that we can't be responsible for. Similarly, sometimes there's a way that I want to control outcomes or I want to make things happen. Pain is an interesting conflict to that, in that, like, if my garage door breaks, I know how to fix my garage door. I can either fix it or I can call somebody to fix it. I've got, like, there's a solution. When my feet hurt and I can't find where it is and I don't know what to do about it, then it drives me crazy because I don't know how to fix it. I can't fix it. And when I can't fix it, all I can do is think about fixing it. And that's, I think, where we run into a common thread is, like, I want to take responsibility and I want to find resolution for something that isn't necessarily resolvable in the way that I would resolve everything else in my life, which then makes me think there's no hope. There is no way to resolve it. Well, that's not true either, but it's a different way of approach, which for people who fit this category, I mean, mindfulness and listening to your body is not a natural instinct for someone who fits these types of descriptions, generally. So, that answer your question?
Yeah. Thank you. So if someone fits the type, right? Is there a way, or what would you suggest in kind of preventing getting to the point of chronic pain?
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. Oh, you're thinking about kids. Yeah, maybe. So, yeah, what I would say with that is, like, the question, in case you didn't hear it, the question is, how do you prevent chronic pain maybe in somebody who is in that type category, but they don't have chronic pain, but they're in, again, like your kids or younger people in your life, or even young clients. Yeah. So part of that, I think the answer for that falls into learning before we need it, how to do some of the things in terms of mindfulness and listening to our body and paying attention to what's going in our body, which part of the reason that these type categories exist is because it's like, I don't have time for that. I don't have time to do those things. And that it is that tends to create chronic pain. I don't have time to take care of my body. Well, then that means your body at some point is going to reach out to you and say, guess what? Now you're going to make time to take care of me. And so it is learning how to do that before our bodies tell us that we have to. So it's those practices. That's what comes to mind. There may be more, but that's what I'm thinking.
How do boundaries fit into that? You mentioned boundaries.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah, how do boundaries fit into that? So I think it depends again on the age of what who we're talking about. But people have a tendency that fits into these categories. They have a tendency to take responsibility for things that just aren't theirs, but they want to take responsibility for it. They want to control the outcome. And again, part of that practice, which is, right? It's like, yes, I'm afraid of what's going to happen if I don't. I'm afraid of what's going to happen to them if I don't. I'm afraid what's going to happen to me if we don't. So being able to wrestle with that anxiety, but also being able to wrestle with what is my responsibility, what isn't my responsibility. Mindfulness, body tracking, and boundaries, and what do I have control over and what do I not have control over, and what do I need to be doing and what do I not need to be doing, and how do I make use of my time, and all these different things that sort of play into those experiences and those emotions. But we're listening to our body. Yeah.
I noticed under the types OCD.
Mm-hmm.
I'm just curious what you think about that. What about that diagnosis correlates with chronic pain?
So I think a lot of the diagnosis of OCD has to do with anxiety of what is happening or what is going to happen if I don't. And so that seems to be kind of a common thread there, again, is just anxiety of what'll happen if I don't do this thing. And so, yeah, complicated process. That's a good question. What else? Anything else? And if by the way, if you're online, it is noon. if you need to go, you can go. Otherwise, I'll kick you out in a minute. But in the meantime, anybody else have any questions? Any more questions or thoughts or observations?
Very interesting. So interesting.
Good.
Very helpful.
Good. Okay, well then we'll disconnect. This is recorded, so hopefully if the recording works out well, we'll get it posted up on and send out a note to let you all know where it's at, and fill out that survey, please, so that we can get that feedback, because we really appreciate it and need that. Thank you very much for joining us, and thank y'all in the room for giving me the chance. Appreciate it.